How'd all these people get in my room? Look at this. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the USHCC's Presidential Candidate Q&A. My name is Javier Palomares, and as President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I have the honor of representing 3.2 million Hispanic-owned firms in this country that collectively contribute over $486 billion to our American economy every year. We also advocate on behalf of 250 major American corporations, and we do this through our network of over 200 local chambers and business associations nationwide. And while the USHCC represents the interests of businessmen and women who happen to be of Hispanic descent, we never forget that we are first and foremost American businesses. And every tax bill we pay, every job we create, every product we manufacture, and every service we provide goes to benefit this American economy. Now, this event follows headlining stories concerning the involvement of presidential candidates with America's Hispanic community. And to his credit, this happens to be Governor O'Malley's first public engagement as a presidential candidate following his announcement just last Saturday. As an association that represents 3.2 million Hispanic business owners, we have an accountability to ensure that their voices are heard by each candidate, not only as business leaders, but as taxpayers, campaign donors, and ultimately as voters. This Q&A session is the second in a series. You may know that last month we engaged with Senator Ted Cruz in a 90-minute discussion at the National Press Club here in D.C. This forum is meant to set the record straight on a wide array of issues that concern Hispanic Americans. Today we will be talking about jobs, the economy, race relations, immigration, and foreign relations. Frankly, issues that affect all Americans. We'll spend about 45 minutes in conversation between myself and the governor, and then we will take questions from the audience. With that, I'd like to welcome Governor Martin O'Malley. Mr. Governor.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Governor.
Thanks.
So, Governor, we had a couple of minutes to get used to each other, and of course we know each other from our engagements in the past. So I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm hard on you, which I won't be. But again, thank you for joining us. This is a special time for us, and we appreciate it very much. I'd like to start right off by addressing something head on. A CBS News poll earlier this month found that 11% of Democrats would consider supporting you for the nomination, but 72% said that they don't know you well enough to make that determination yet. So, Governor, our members want to know, beyond Martin O'Malley, the candidate, who is Martin O'Malley, the man, and how do you intend to earn the nomination?
Well, I am one of 6 kids born to Tom and Barbara O'Malley, who were 2 Americans born into the Depression. My dad flew 33 missions over Japan in a B-24 Liberator, and went to college only because of the GI Bill and a far-seeing and generous country that understood that the stronger we made our citizens, the more we made it possible for more families to send their kids to college, the stronger we would be as a nation. So I was taught around our dinner table that each generation has a responsibility to become great, and thereby making our country even greater. I was also taught that public service is actually a noble calling, and that we were all to be involved as we could in the political life of our community. And I've served now 15 years as an elected executive, as the mayor of a big city, a great city with great challenges, and then for 8 years as a governor. And I am a father and husband, have 4 great kids. My daughters are 24 and 23, and my sons are 17 and 12.
Let's talk about Hillary a little bit. A reporter from Politico said, and I quote, O'Malley so far has appeared reluctant to take on Clinton directly. So the question is, and no pun intended here, Governor, are you, as they say, ready for Hillary?
Look, I am running for President of the United States because I believe that the American dream that we share is in deep trouble. And we need to create an economy that actually works again for all of our people. So I'm running in order to make my country a better place. And I'm running in order to give my kids and all of our kids a better future. And other candidates in this race have come to the conclusion that they have that combination of experience and vision to be able to do this. And so now the way it works is, now that we've made our minds, now the public gets to decide. And that's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, it sounds like you are ready for Hillary. I do want to ask, though, something specific to the Hispanic electorate. And it's a circuitous way to get to it, but bear with me. So as you know, over the last decade, some 52% of the overall population growth of this nation came from the Hispanic community. Today, 1 in 6 people breathing in this country is of Hispanic descent. Right now, as we're speaking, 1 in 4 children in grade school is of Hispanic descent. So as I like to say, if you're not related to a Latino, like right at this moment, give us about 15 minutes and we'll get around to you as well, O'Malley. But seriously, every 30 seconds, a Hispanic turns 18 in this country and becomes an eligible voter. That's a potential 52,000 brand new minted voters every month. And that is going to be the case for the next 21 years, they're telling us. Now, in 2012, Governor Romney failed to garner a substantial portion of the Hispanic vote. while concurrently President Obama garnered 72% of that vote. So the question is, how and what will you do to inform, to mobilize, and to attract America's burgeoning Hispanic vote?
Well, let me say that I believe that one of the greatest strengths we have as a nation is our diversity. And I believe that in every generation, our country is made, is made better and made stronger by the arrival of new Americans. And so that's a part of my DNA. That's part of my makeup. I always kept a sign from the 1880s on my desk as mayor and as governor that read, "No Irish need apply." And so I grew up in a household where we were all very keenly aware that we weren't strangers in a strange land. But the greatness of America is that in this land of opportunity, wherever you've come from and wherever you start, you're able to get ahead. And because of your hard work and your commitment and your love of family, you can give your children and grandchildren a better future. I think that is the goodness that we need to speak to as candidates about where our country's going. There are some, because we've had this rather prolonged and brutal economy now, because we are in a situation where 70% of us are earning the same or less than we were 12 years ago. It creates an atmosphere that is ripe for scapegoating of the latest arrivals. That's not the first time we've gone through that as a country. But the longer arc of our history says that we're all in this together and that we need to help each other if we're going to succeed. So that's the sort of campaign I intend to articulate. That is not limited to, that is not a message that I will somehow just rifle shoot into, one audience or to Latino audiences. I mean, I think we need to speak to immigration reform as a national economic priority, as a national security priority, not for this group or for that group, but for us, for our country. And that's the kind of campaign I'm going to run.
Well, I think we agree on a couple of things. I think we see America's immigrant community, not just the Hispanic immigrant community, but the immigrant community in general, as an economic boon to this nation and,
absolutely.
and an asset to be harnessed.
I mean, how are you going to get wages to go up if you allow 11 million people to live in the shadow economy? That doesn't make sense. If we had immigration reform, I saw one study that says median household wages in the United States would go up $250 if just by doing immigration reform, not to mention what it does for the encouragement of startups. We know that new American people are far more willing to take business risks and start new ventures, and we certainly saw that in Maryland. We had we were able to increase our awards, our state procurement awards to Latino-owned businesses by over 150% during our time there. So, look, the genius of our country is the more fully people are included in the economic, social, and political life of our community, of our country, of our state, the better all of us do, the better our economy works. Well, I'm really encouraged by the amount of diversity on your team already, including the recent hire of Gabriela Domancian. Congratulations on that. Should we expect to see more Latinos on your team? I think you should. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that, Governor. Good. And by the way, back to the sign, I think I have my own version of the sign, but mine doesn't say Irish. It's got Irish X'd out, it says Hispanic on it, but I'd like to meet the guy who created the signs. Let's talk a little bit about the economy and small business. I think it's an issue that all Americans care about, this issue of jobs and our economy. As you know, small businesses create 2/3 of all new jobs in this country. Hispanic businesses are at the forefront of that growth. We're starting new ventures at a rate of 3 to 1 when compared to the general market. And as I mentioned earlier, it's $486 billion worth of economic contribution. And to your point earlier, you've had a great record of supporting small and minority-owned firms in your state. When you were governor. In fact, when you addressed our association, you talked about the fact that you had more than doubled, contracting with minority and Hispanic-owned firms in the state of Maryland. So the question is, as president, how would you continue to spur the growth of all American business, but specifically small businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses? Look, we have one of the biggest problems we have in terms of the operation and the functioning of our economy today is a lack of demand. In other words, for the longer arc of our nation's history, because of our diversity, because of our creativity, we've been a very innovative nation. Innovation writ large, new products, new solutions to human problems. But also because in the past, we had always kept wage policies and people at the center of our equation, workers were able to earn more, and that tension that existed between the solutions to the human problems and the ability of workers to actually buy those things, cars or other things, was what made our economy grow, and made it grow in a way that allowed every part of our earning spectrum to be able to get ahead. All of that changed about 30 years ago. We need to realize that our economy is not money, our economy is people. And we need to put wage policies at the center, which means raising minimum wage, overtime pay for overtime work. We need to make it easier rather than harder for people to bargain collectively. We need to improve the education levels of our next generation, meaning making college more affordable for more people. We need to expand Social Security so we're not pushing our seniors off of a poverty cliff in their retirement years. And so these are the things we need to do in a macroeconomic sense to make our economy go. The capital has not been as widely available as it is today. But what's not as widely available as it was 12 years ago, when most of us were earning more than we are now, is the demand. So in order to allow small businesses to thrive, in order to create an innovation economy, in order to create more startups, we have to do a better job on the demand side of our economy. Are there other things that we can do? Sure. In our state, I love this one. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is hardly ever a mouthpiece for any Democratic governor, named Maryland the #1 state for innovation and entrepreneurship. And we did a number of things, from investor tax credits to incubators to the Invest Maryland, sort of a venture fund that we created by allowing some large entities to forward pay their taxes at a slight discount, which gave us this evergreen fund for investments in early stage businesses. There's lots of things that we can do, but no state and no city is an island. We need to get our national economy functioning again by getting wages to start rising instead of declining.
Which is, I think, a great segue to my next question. Speaking of wages and earnings, let's talk a little bit about equal pay. Women's wages continue to stubbornly lag behind men's in this country. When they're doing the exact same job, women earn approximately 70 cents on the dollar when compared to their male counterparts. And Hispanic women, by the way, is closer to 60 cents on the dollar. I will say that in your state, women, I think it's more like 86 cents on the dollar, so they're beating the national average, but still not equal. First, why is that in your mind? And then secondly, what would you do as president to address that disparity?
Yeah, great question. The longer arc of our country's story is fuller and participation of all. So we need to have policies at the national level that also encourage greater participation in the workforce by women. In other words, policies that are good for families, paid leave, paid family leave. These are good for our national economy as well. We signed a state version of Lilly Ledbetter in our state. The Center for American Progress, I believe, named our state the #1 state for women-owned businesses in the United States. This is work that we have to continue to tend towards, and we have to appoint people at the Department of Labor that enforce our laws and continue to push until we reach a day where my daughters aren't going to automatically assume that they will make 86 cents on the dollar or 60 cents on the dollar as a man will.
Well, I don't think your daughters would have this problem, the daughters of a governor, but the average woman in this country might have a bit more of a challenge. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we need to keep pushing until we reach that point where where we have that sort of equity.
So let's talk a bit about government spending and regulation. Our association and our membership, we understand that government does have an important role to play in the growth of American businesses, particularly small businesses. But we do worry about government overreach. Now, you have you've claimed to have cut government spending more than any Maryland governor in modern history. And you've championed three things that I know of. First, greater government oversight on Wall Street. Second, leveling the playing field for the middle class. And third, a government that puts, and I quote, national interests ahead of special interests. With that as a backdrop, and as president, how would you strike a balance between appropriate government oversight and government overreach?
Yeah, well, it's all about balance, really. One of the greatest hits that every small business in America took happened in 2008 when reckless behavior, unpoliced on Wall Street, wiped out thousands and thousands of businesses, millions of jobs, millions of Americans lost their home. The solution there was not less regulation. The solution there was more regulation. So as a party, my party, I'm speaking the Democratic Party, we need to fulfill the promise that people believed we had made, that we put robust measures in place with strong deterrents, prosecuting cheats in order to prevent this sort of recurrence of this. When Paul Volcker says that we're in just as great a danger today as we were 8 years ago, that's a problem, and that's a grave government failure. And no amount of public-private partnership, self-policing, or private industry is going to do that for us. Americans are right to expect that their federal government should protect them from reckless behavior by big banks. And when it comes to the environment, I mean, look, no generation has the right to rob another generation of clean air or clean water. And so we should expect that a government will be effective in protecting those natural resources, which are part of the generational legacy of our country. What I found happens a lot, though, in government, and I found this as an executive both in the city, where we streamlined our building permit process, went from the slowest in the region to the fastest in terms of getting a business permit. And I found this at the state as well, is that often in government there's two speeds when it comes to regulation: on and off. And a lot of times people forget why a regulation was even put in place in the first place. So we launched an initiative called Maryland Made Easy. We made some improvements to a number of business processes when it comes to things like highway access permits. I did an executive order and asked each of my department secretaries to get rid of obsolete regulations that are no longer needed. And what we found in the course of that was that one of the things that drives people nuts, understandably, is the burden of compliance. It's not that the rules are necessarily onerous, it's the number of times you have to fill out your name and your address, and the sort of things that better technology allows you to do. We also greatly automated with a private company. We had them come in and move so much of our stuff off of paper and to online. We had to pay a little fee per service, but people were willing to pay it because it made government easier to deal with and allowed people to comply administratively without getting in the way.
And do you think with the cumbersome infrastructure of this nation and the Congress that one would have to work with to get that kind of innovation and creativity at the federal level, are you confident that as president you could accomplish what you've accomplished or you did accomplish in Maryland?
What I would be very excited about doing at the federal level is to put in place an executive method that allows us to institutionalize a sort of routine follow-up, not on a crisis-by-crisis basis, not on an annual budgetary input basis, but on a regular and routine way. And when I was first elected mayor of Baltimore, we created, unintentionally mind you, we created a new way of governing. We called it City Stat. And we started measuring, we got the Innovations in Government Award from the Kennedy School at Harvard. And this was the big innovation. We started measuring the outputs of government instead of just its annual budgetary inputs. We gathered people on a rotating within every 14-day period, 14 different departments were in front of me with their command staff, my command staff, and we would have the common platform of geographic information systems and 311 on the front end for customer service. So we could see, in essence, whether we were doing better this week than we were last week. And we never made sort of lightning bolt progress in a 2-week period of time. But if you improve your process 1 or 2% every 2 weeks, if you use those times to lift up the leaders, if you ask questions like, When was the last time we took a look at any of these regulations and actually combed through them to get rid of them? And that's the sort of work you really don't need Congress to do. But you do need a modern executive method. And I would be very excited as president to put a modern executive method at the center of our federal executive branch.
That's encouraging. Let's talk a little bit about education. As governor of Maryland, you had a strong record on education. At the USHCC, by the way, we see education as an economic issue.
Oh, so do I.
We believe that an educated and prepared workforce is vital for the continued competitiveness of this country. We believe that business and good education are inextricably tied. Now, according to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, unfortunately, only 25% of U.S. public high school graduates have the skills needed to succeed academically in college. And of those, more than 40% drop out before they ever attain their college degree. So the question is, Governor, as president, how would you make sure that our country's future workforce is receiving the highly necessary and the high quality education that is needed to compete globally? Yeah,
this is one of those pillars of a successful economy. There's people all over the world that are copying what we had been doing for a good long time, and now some of those nations are moving ahead of us in terms of the skills of their kids. So we have work to do. I believe that the Common Core curriculum is actually a positive step in the direction of raising standards and giving our kids the skills they need. Never before, but in the middle of a recession in our state, the state of Maryland, we did more for education, even with the budget constraints. And we made the improvements necessary for our public schools to be recognized as the best public schools in America for 5 years in a row. More of our kids take and pass AP level courses than kids in any other state in America. There's some exciting things going on just over the horizon, I think, that are coming to education. And as our federal government needs to help us accelerate these things. Three big kind of game changers, as I said. One is the move to universal pre-K. We need to find a way to move to universal pre-K throughout our country. I saw as mayor of Baltimore that when we went to full-day kindergarten for the first time, that very first cohort of kids that had the benefit of full-day kindergarten popped up above the national average on reading and math in the first grade, and that wave of improvement continued for the following years. So particularly for poor families that struggle with all the issues of hunger and poverty and literacy, full-day pre-K is really important. The other two are these. We have learned so much now about how individuals learn best. And each of us has a different way of learning. Our minds wired slightly differently. And now with the advent of technology and the move from textbooks to iPads, we can take what we know about individual cognition, put it together with the ability to present material in personalized ways, almost like personalized medicine, but this is personalized education with immediate feedback loops that will make the teaching experience more rewarding and less rote. So that's another exciting move. The third one is this. We have a real need for a new and far more relevant career and technical education in our high schools. I believe that we should redesign that fourth year of high school so that when a kid graduates, they have not only a diploma that means something, but also some early access to college credit, and also a certificate in a skill that's in demand in this modern economy. You could fill a lot of jobs simply by offering some higher level computer and technical skills in our high schools, and you would reduce your dropout rate, you would increase your graduation rate, and for a lot of our kids, their only hope of going to college, given the cost currently, will be if they have a job when they come out of high school.
Oh, good point. Let's talk about crime a little bit. When it comes to crime, you famously reduced violent crime in Baltimore by, I think, 46% during your time as mayor. However, some community leaders have said that your zero tolerance policy was the very cause for the mistrust between police and communities of color. In fact, the ACLU of Maryland said that your administration left a legacy, and I quote, of hyper-aggressive and militarized policing, which had contributed to the outrage in Baltimore. So the question is, what is your response to those making the connection between your zero tolerance policy and the current situation and the mistrust that exists in places like Baltimore?
Let's talk about this. I don't believe that there's anyone in either party that's had more experience than I've had in these last 15 years of the intertwined issues of the racial legacy that all of us share as Americans, and the way that is throughout our history intertwined with policing in America. When I was elected mayor of Baltimore in 1999, our city had become the most violent, addicted, and abandoned city in America. And I was running as a minority white candidate in a majority African American city. So all summer, we talked about the reality that we shared. We talked about the justice and the injustice of two different types of police response. Namely, if you called 911 from a wealthier neighborhood, black or white, the police came, and they got right out of their car. But if you called from a poorer neighborhood, and most of our poorest neighborhoods are black, the police hardly ever came. And when they did come, they never got out of the cars. Both of the candidates that I ran against that year represented the two hardest hit areas of our city, the east side and the west side. Both of them were African American candidates with far superior name recognition to mine. One was the council president, had 90% name recognition. The other had 80%. And when I began that race, I was the first choice of a whopping 7% of my neighbors. That's when I knew I had them. But we had the conversation all summer about whether or not we were going to continue to allow our city to be the violent place it had become. Whether we would keep telling ourselves that somehow if the people that are shot aren't like us, or it's not happening in our neighborhood, that maybe we shouldn't be concerned about it. And then on election night, we decided to come together as a city and do something about it. All that summer we talked about not only policing, but about the things we need to do a better job of policing the police. A civilian review board, making sure it's staffed with its own detectives so that they can investigate any case they want. Using modern technology to track excessive force, brutality, discourtesy complaints. And during my time as mayor, because we followed through on all of those commitments, and every day I had to answer the question of, are you improving how we police the police? Are you improving police-community relations? We were able to drive, not only were we able to achieve record reductions in crime, we were also able to drive police-involved shootings down to the lowest level, I think in modern times. One year was the lowest level we had ever had. So this is the problem of race in America, and the problem of policing and excessive policing did not begin in 1999. This is something we have to tend to. And every day in office we launched a campaign called the Believe campaign, specifically to improve police-community relations. I was elected that fall, by the way, with 91% of the vote. I won both of my opponents' 2 districts against them in that primary, won all 6 of those districts. And then 4 years later, people had the opportunity to evaluate my job performance. And I was reelected with 88% of the vote 4 years later. And I would not have been elected governor of Maryland in 2006 were it not for the overwhelming support I received from the east side and the west sides of Baltimore, who saw the biggest improvements in improving safety in their neighborhoods. And then in my re-election to governor, I once again, for the 4th time, received overwhelming support, notwithstanding the ACLU and the 13 people that they put together for a suit. But we also did other things along the way. We signed legislation to restore voting rights to 52,000 people with felony convictions. When I was done with 8 years of being governor, we had the trifecta of not only driving violent crime down to a 30-year low, we reduced our recidivism rate by 15%, and we reduced our incarcerated population to the lowest levels that it had in 20 years. And we greatly improved reentry. And 50 days into office, I closed down the most violent and notorious prison in our state, in the Maryland House of Correction. So what our challenge now going forward as a country? Because of technology and because of the ubiquitous everywhere nature of cell phone cameras and the videos, we are all going to see a lot more images of police and civilian involved encounters. Now that's a very good thing long term, but for the short term, it is calling upon police commanders and police leaders and civilian authorities to greatly accelerate the development of technology like body cameras so that the police can stay ahead of that curve in terms of openness and transparency. We were leaders in our city in putting closed-circuit televisions all over our public spaces. I wish in retrospect that we had been leaders and had implemented body cameras as well. I think that will help. But look, these are wounds we have to constantly tend to. We need to every day strive to become smarter on crime and tougher on the causes of crime. And if Javier, I could say just one last thing. These policing incidents are the spark. But the rage that erupted in Baltimore that night was not only about policing and only about race. It was about the fact that our economy is leaving huge portions of our population behind. And Baltimore unemployment's higher than it was 8 years ago, higher in Philadelphia, higher in New York, higher in Chicago, higher in Los Angeles. And when you create conditions that tell whole populations and neighborhoods that they are literally worth less than they were 12 years ago, and maybe worth less still, then you're telling people that they're unneeded, they're unheard, they're unseen, they're unrecognized. And that sort of extreme desperation, extreme poverty creates conditions for extreme violence. And it's not only limited to cities. Look at all of the white kids killing themselves on heroin in small towns and suburban areas. There is a deep sense of despair in our country because of the structural unemployment that in many places is getting worse. And we need to fix it.
Thank you, Governor. Let's talk a little bit about foreign relations. At a time when most candidates seem to be focusing on U.S. relations with regions that are east or west of our nation, I'd like to ask you about countries that are contiguous to the U.S. Said another way, I want to ask you about countries that are either north or south of the United States. At the USHCC, we believe that this axis of commerce still holds great promise. So, as president, what would you do to improve relations in the Western Hemisphere, especially in regards to boosting economic ties and commercial growth?
Yeah, I would plan to apportion a lot more attention and a lot more of my personal time to improving relations in the Americas. We are not going to be able to be strong in this world or have a strong national security if we do not make ourselves strong at home, namely in our own country, creating a national economy that actually works for all of our people. But the key to this much more connected world that we live in with globalization and information, I believe is going to be found here in the Americas. I was heartened to see, and I think it's a very positive development, that we are normalizing relations with Cuba. That has been a pebble in our American shoe for many, many years here. But I think that there is tremendous potential to collaborate and to cooperate, especially where food and energy issues are concerned. And it is in our best interest. I mean, we all remember the scenes of the refugee kids coming here from Honduras and El Salvador. We need to have a national security strategy that puts at the center threat reductions before we're faced with a crisis. In this case, it was a crisis of those young kids coming to our borders and frankly are not really treating them with the sort of dignity and respect that we should have as Americans. But The truth is, we should have been a lot more involved before it got to the point where moms and dads are putting their kids on trains to send them across the desert because they're afraid they're going to be murdered if they stay at home. We can be a positive force for good in our own hemisphere, but we shouldn't wait until there's an immigration crisis or a nation-state collapse on our borders. So I'm very excited about the notion of creating a much stronger foreign policy that begins here in the Americas. You know, this term pivot left, pivot right, pivot east, pivot west. We are a great nation. We don't pivot. We should be engaged with all of our neighbors, but first and foremost, the ones who are closest to us.
So yeah, and I think I remember you, and I think, was it Rahm Emanuel that offered up big cities to take some of those kids in and help out? I think that was a real leadership move in that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and to tribute to the people I served, but we had I pulled together an ecumenical group of faith leaders, and they really stepped up to the plate. And Maryland ended up housing more of the Central American refugee kids per capita than any other state in the Union. And
not bad for an Irishman.
Yeah. I was doing this, you know, we do these holiday open houses, and I will stand there in front of the Christmas tree with my wife, and people come through. And shortly after, you know, that crisis and so locating so many kids, this man came through the line and he said something to a 15-year-old that was with him. And then he said to me in English, "This is Emmanuel. He is one of the Central American refugee kids who, because of you, is able to be here this Christmas and safe." And the boy shook my hand tentatively and then immediately locked me in this bear hug. And I will never, ever forget that. That's the country we need to be, you know, to be the generous and compassionate people. That's what makes us strong in the world.
To be America again. You know, it's funny because I had a conversation with the president a while back when he was headed to Latin America, I think Mexico, and then on to maybe Costa Rica. And of course, we touched on a number of things. And the one thing I asked of the president, I said, you know, as the leader of the greatest economy in the world, I would love for you to change the narrative that has for too long defined a relationship between America and Latin America, and specifically Mexico. I said, when I hear about Mexico on CNN or ABC or MSNBC or Univision for that matter, what I hear about are rampant drug wars. And one would think that there's this horde of Mexicans coming across the border every single day, like this big tsunami coming across. And I hear about mass murders, and none of that is inaccurate, nor should we turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to those issues. But what I never hear, Mr. President, is that Mexico, at the time, is the second largest trading partner to America, has been for the last 87 years. Bigger than Great Britain, bigger than France, bigger than Germany, bigger than Japan, bigger than India, and yet we never hear about that, Mr. President. I'd love for you to change that narrative so that the average American recognizes the inextricable relationship, economic relationship, that exists between this country and our immediate partners, not only to the north, but to the south. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I think you expressed my thoughts on it.
I'll bill you later, Governor.
Yeah, there's a larger story here. I mean, a lot of times it falls into a shorthand it's if our whole relationship is defined by the drug we buy and the guns we send and the violence and the loss of life. But there's a much richer relationships to be fostered there. And I also think that it may well be a greater role for sort of city-to-city diplomacy to be played here. It's been my experience that mayors all around the world speak the same language. They all have the same priorities. You've seen the positive things that have happened in Medellin, Colombia with our help and with our collaboration. We need to make those same investments, of course, here in our own cities. We need to have an agenda for American cities. But I do believe that in the collaborations on a renewable energy future, I believe that relationships within our hemisphere are critically important when it comes to combating the drought and the famine, the flood of climate change, the food security issues, being able to feed our people. The relationship within our own hemisphere is critically important. And let's be honest here, the great threat that we face from violence, drug gangs, drug consumption, overdoses, and guns, I mean, that's an American problem. That is a hemisphere problem. And we need to work together to solve that problem and save lives.
Yeah, it's funny that you point to the local leadership and how it seems to be pointing the way. Certainly Julian Castro, when he was mayor of San Antonio, I recently spoke with Denise Parker in Houston, and even Governor Gary Herbert in Utah. They appear to be kind of pointing the way forward here. They're taking a very active role in building better relationships between either their state or their city and cities south of us. So it's an interesting.
And my friend Manny Diaz, who is the former mayor of Miami, he claims, I don't know if this is true, he claims he's hosted more heads of state from in the Americas than any other mayor, being the mayor of Miami. But there are those relationships.
So on the subject of kind of our neighbors to the south, let's talk a little bit more about immigration. And Governor, as you know, Hispanics we're not a monolithic community. In fact, our association, I think, represents the broadest spectrum of political beliefs and ideology than any other organization in this country. We literally have members who have literally just arrived here and started a little mom and pop shop, all the way to members who have been here generations and are now running $10 billion, $15 billion, $20 billion companies.
It's a great organization. I tell you, this is not my first time here.
No,
so everything you say I have seen firsthand.
So as you know, we're not a monolithic community. In fact, according to a poll that we conducted with 2,000 registered Hispanic voters, jobs, the economy, national security, healthcare, the federal budget, all of these things were important to our constituency. But on the issue of immigration specifically, uncannily and not surprisingly, our association views immigration reform as an economic imperative, first of all. But it is amazing how unifying an issue that was, regardless of where these respondents were on the social or political scale. And I know you've taken a very progressive stance already on immigration. Now, we already know where Hillary is on this issue, and so my question to you is, what concrete commitments are you willing to make on reforming what is a broken immigration policy, and how will you outdo your opponents on that issue?
Yeah, there are a number of us now in the Democratic race for president. I am the only one with 15 years of executive experience. And one of the greatest indicators of a person's future actions will be how they acted in the past when they had the power. We didn't always get it done the first time, but we did pass legislation to give new Americans the ability to get a driver's license wherever they stood in the naturalization process. We told ICE that we are not going to honor every detainer that they send, because it was obvious to us that there was not the public safety imperative attached to a lot of those that we had been urging. We passed the DREAM Act in our state, and then we defended it at the ballot. And as you might understand, the DREAM Act kids don't have a super PAC, so we had to raise the dollars to do that ourselves. I believe that immigration reform is an economic imperative for our country. But the biggest challenge we face right now is that Americans, for the first time, this side of World War II, are earning the same or less than they were a decade ago. There are many things we need to do to get wages going up again, but one of them is getting people out of the shadow economy. And that means comprehensive immigration reform for the 11 million of our neighbors who right now are in the shadows. That's not good for our security, it's not good for our economy, and it's not good for the wages of American families. Best is when people are working, paying taxes, abiding by the rules, working hard, loving their families, and living in the full light of society. So I intend to pursue this, and I intend to pursue it first and foremost by creating that larger conversation and that larger understanding in the course of this election. I am a lifelong Democrat, and so I can say this, that sometimes our party falls into a bad habit of trying to appease constituencies rather than speaking to the national interest. So as a party, we need to talk about immigration reform as essential for our American economy, as essential for our security as Americans, as good for our national interest. Will it be good for Latino families who are not yet naturalized and want to? Yes, sure it will. Yeah. But to create the deeper understanding and the broader consensus that then pushes on Congress to get this done requires that we make this a national economic and national security imperative and make the case to people in the election.
So given that you think it is an imperative, would you tackle it within the first 100 days in office? I
would absolutely do everything in my power. I mean, we have to persuade Congress, but I would not give up. Look, there were many things. I would use my executive authority to protect public safety, but also guided by the truth that we should not be breaking up families. Families are the building blocks of the United States of America, our security and our economy. And so while being mindful of public safety, I would use my executive authority to be guided by the truth that we should keep families together and not break families up. And I would continue to push for immigration reform through Congress until we get it done. There were many things over the course of 8 years as governor that I did not succeed at achieving the first time. The death penalty took us 3 times before we ultimately repealed it. But we were always clear about where we were going, and we never ever gave up. And that's what I intend to do on immigration reform until we return to our true selves as Americans and get our neighbors out of the shadows and into the mainstream of American life.
If I hear you correctly, tackle it within the first 100 days, use executive authority in action, and keeping families together.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I'd love to take some questions from our audience, Governor, if that's good with you. I'd like to start with Ken Thomas, but I don't see Ken. Ken, how the heck are you? Ken Thomas from the Associated Press. Ken?
Thanks, Governor. In your campaign launch in Baltimore last weekend, you talked about the need to break up large Wall Street banks. And you just discussed your concerns about the reckless behavior, in your words, by the big banks. Given those concerns, will you accept campaign contributions from Wall Street banks and their top executives? And have you sought contributions from executives from Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs? There are reports to that effect.
I probably have. I was the chair of the Democratic Governors Association, so I'm quite sure I called everybody that they put on sheets in front of me. I understand I've been named public enemy #1 by Goldman Sachs. So while I'm 3 days a presidential candidate, I am 1 day a public enemy of Goldman Sachs. Having said that, there's a lot of good people that work in our financial industry too. This is primarily a political failing that we haven't followed through on reforming Wall Street. I'm not prone to call up the head of Goldman Sachs or those individuals, nor am I inclined to tell people that work in the financial industry that they shouldn't be involved in my campaign. In fact, I think they should. There's a lot of people who work in the financial sector and Wall Street who are good people and are just as saddened by this sort of behavior and want their country and their government to actually work and function.
Speaking of good people who work in the financial industry, I see Rodney Hood from JP Morgan Chase right here. Rodney, do you have a question for the governor?
Yes, I do. But first, Governor, I'd like to welcome you here to Washington and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Rodney.
I must say, though, throughout this year's election cycle and next year's, we're going to see a lot of focus on the conversation and the narrative is going to be on Wall Street firms. And I'm delighted, though, to know that you think that some of us are doing good things, because I like to think that we're doing some good things as well. I want to focus on a little bit of what we are doing as financial institutions around lending to small minority businesses. A lot of us on Wall Street are really proud of the work that we're doing to help the millions of minority business customers have access to capital.
Absolutely.
But in addition to having that access, we are also working with them diligently on the supplier diversity side. That means that we are hiring them to provide us with contracts and services, in addition to providing them with loan capital. How do you ensure that policy proposals such as yours to break up the big banks would not hinder our ability to not only lend and support small businesses, but how do you ensure that doesn't have a deleterious effect on the American economy?
Yeah, look, we need to find ways to reward productive investment more and to discourage reckless or criminal behavior more. We need to do both of those things at the same time. some of the largest banks were themselves supposed to figure out how it is that they could create their own sort of living wills as to what they would need to do in order to separate. None of them have really stepped up to do that, though, have they? So, look, I believe that competition is good, and I believe that the pendulum towards monopoly and the concentration of corporate power and the $15 trillion in banking assets that are now controlled by just 5 banks is probably not, a stable way to run an economy. For 7 years, we had it right when Glass-Steagall prevented the commercial and the investment banks from becoming these monoliths that then the rest of us all have to bail out. And I think a lot of people, some of whom were even involved in the repeal of Glass-Steagall, will admit today they probably should not have done that in retrospect that was a mistake. But the larger issue is how do we reward productive investment? How do we create a robust ecosystem of community banks that are close to people and that are able to follow the rules without you talk about the red tape? I tell you, the big banks have plenty of money to hire as many compliance and lawyer people as they like, but some of the rules that we put in place punish the community banks that are really the lifeblood of smaller economies and family-owned businesses. So, look, this is all still a work in progress, but it's going to require balance. We need to have strong financial institutions. We need to have a level playing field. And it's also not too much for the American people to expect that their government will prevent them from being worked over by huge, concentrated, monopolistic power. I mean, you look at the number of rules that are violated again and again. You can get pulled over for a broken taillight in our country, but if you wreck the nation's economy, there's no repercussions. This stuff to pay the fines without ever admitting guilt. No point system. So, and then you write off these fines as if they're the cost of doing business. That just doesn't seem to be the way our nation's economy functions well.
Let me ask Stephen Crowley of the New York Times. Stephen? Nothing from Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. It's brilliant.
That was your best response right there. I saw Tsitsiki Felix from Univision. Tsitsiki, a question?
How are you, Governor?
I'm well. How about you?
Good, thank you. You made your position clear regarding the immigration reform, and how do you feel about the action from President Obama? How would you do things different from how he's done in the past? And how would you take on deportations if you were to become president?
Yeah, I believe that I think that deportation should be limited to the public safety imperative. I believe that we hurt ourselves when we use deportations in the sort of way that leads to the breakup of families, creates greater costs, greater heartache. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and we have to engage with all of our members of Congress in order to make that happen. And that's what I intend to do. Look, every election is a chance for a deeper conversation and a new consensus to be formed. You won't forge a new consensus by following public opinion polls. You do it by leading and by going out and putting your political capital on the line to make the point that immigration reform will be good for our country's economy, good for American wages, good for our security. It's important that we do it. There's no magic wand. There's no easy button to this. We have to talk with one another. I mean, we are going through right now an unprecedented political time in our, well, it's not unprecedented. We're going through a period of great political division in our country. We've been through these times before, and we come through them. Expectations become behavior. So, I expect that we will come through these times, and as we do, we will be able to forge a larger consensus for immigration reform. You know, as I've traveled around the country over the last year, I never meet anybody under 40, any Americans under 40, who want to blame immigrants or new Americans for the challenges our country faces. I don't find that scapegoating among people under 40. So what that tells me is that there is a new consensus that is rising up. And we can accelerate the arrival of that consensus with leadership. Not leadership that follows public opinion, but leadership that leads public opinion. So that's what I intend to do.
I know Jim Avila got detained in New York, but I think Serena Marshall from ABC News was going to be with us. Serena? There you go. Serena, do you have a question for the governor?
Yes, hi, thank you, Governor. I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on how you plan to differentiate yourself from Hillary on immigration. She has a strong foothold with the Hispanics, so what do you plan to do that'll help you get that foothold ahead of her?
I plan to run a campaign that offers new leadership with executive experience, with progressive values, and a fearlessness that I believe will rally people to this candidacy. I've listed the things that I did when I had the power and when I was in office. And I intend to offer that same sort of leadership, and then we'll let the people decide.
You know, I'm no pundit, but maybe a Hispanic running mate, that might help, just, you know, for what that's worth.
That's right.
I mean, you know.
I hear you loud and clear. I hear you.
So, Alex Wald from MSNBC. Alex, are you here? No MSNBC in the room. Sam Frizzell from Time. Sam.
President Obama has just signed into law. President Obama has just signed into law a bill that massively overhauls the National Security Agency's role. Would you go further than the current legislation in curtailing surveillance on Americans' communications?
I think the USA Freedom Act is a step in the right direction, and I'm glad that the legislation was passed. Glad the president signed it. I would like to see us go further in terms of a role for a public advocate in the FISA courts. I think that as a lawyer myself by training, I think that our national security and our rights would be better served if we had a bigger role for the public advocate in that FISA court.
I chatted with Maria Peña from La Opinión. Maria, do you have a question for the governor?
It's a very quiet crowd here, isn't it?
The million-dollar question here. No, thank you, Governor, for being here, and for the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for doing this.
Good to be back.
It's kind of following up on this immigration issue, which is one of the, main concerns of Hispanic voters now, according to many polls. President Obama also promised immigration reform within the first 100 days of his presidency, and nothing came of that. Now he's stuck with a lawsuit because the deportation relief orders, are being challenged by 26 states. And I'm wondering...
I think Maryland is one of those.
Maryland is actually supporting the administration. But I'm wondering... well, I don't know, but I don't know if Maryland is, which side Maryland is on this.
That's David Collins. He'll know, the guy next to him.
But I'm wondering, how is your strategy going to be different? How can Hispanic voters trust that a Democratic president will actually implement immigration reform, before the immigration pool gets wider, the illegal immigration pool gets wider? I'm just wondering, Hispanic voters are disenchanted by the Democratic Party because of broken promises, and deportations are happening every single day. The deportation relief orders are on hold. So how is your presidency going to be different and not give Hispanic voters more broken promises?
Look, Hispanic voters are not the only ones who are dissatisfied with the inability of their federal government to deal with important issues and to get things done. Everywhere I go, people repeat two phrases to me over and over again, Javier, every state. And they repeat the phrases, new leadership and getting things done. Mm-hmm. That's where we have this sinking sense as Americans that maybe we're not able to get big things done anymore. I believe we are, and I believe from the attitudes of our young people and where our country's going, that we are passing through this period of instability, but we are moving to a time when a much more connected, compassionate, and generous time, and we have the ability to accelerate that with good leadership. I don't have a crystal ball. None of us does. This is all. If we knew who was going to win the election, we could all save a lot of time and money, right? And a lot of effort. So I am offering myself as a candidate because I've been able to pull people together in the past to do difficult things that many said in the past was not possible. There were many in Baltimore whose attitude was last person out, turn off the lights, it's just going to keep getting more violent and more abandoned. But I brought people together to do that. I brought people together in our state legislature on many a difficult issue, and I intend to make this a national economic, and I intend to make a great comprehensive immigration reform a national economic priority and a national security priority, and I am going to do whatever it takes to get it done during my service in office. I would hope that we can do it within the first 100 days. If we can't, we'll keep working until we get it done. I understand the urgency. I understand why you feel a need to say, will it be done in the first 100 days? We want to get it done as quickly as possible. It should have been done years ago. We have to work through our politics. This is our country. But the good news is those congressional district lines get redrawn every 10 years too. So change is the only variable. I mean, change is, we know that there will always be change. And to be just totally straight up and frank with you, this is going to take a lot of work. I don't believe it's a lack of wanting it to happen that made it impossible to get done in the life of this administration so far. But every election is a new opportunity, and younger people coming of age and voting in their first elections. We have to forge the consensus, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to give up until we get it done.
Great. One last question from our audience. Maria Cardona of Dewey Square got a question for the governor.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Governor, for being here with us. We appreciate your thoughts on all of these important issues. I wanted to ask you about another hot topic that is of front page value these days, and that's trade. As you know, many Latino entrepreneurs and the majority of the business community are for this fast-track agreement that the president is looking for and for TPP and other trade agreements. I guess my question is twofold. The first one is, where do you stand on this issue? And secondly, you know it's an issue that divides the Democratic Party. Do you think it needs to be that way? Or can there be a conversation where we can understand that there are global opportunities that we can't cut ourselves off from, but at the same time focus on the important issues of labor and environmental protections?
Yeah, great question. I've led trade delegations all around the world from my state, and Fred Hochberg at the Export-Import will tell you that of all the states that he deals with, he's rarely come across a state that had as many kind of mid-sized and smaller businesses involved in our trade efforts. One of the most vibrant business organizations in our state is the World Trade Center Institute there in Baltimore. They do some great things, biotech, life science, as well as more sort of traditional commodity export sort of things. So I've been to India, led trade delegation to India, to China, to South Korea. I supported the South Korea free trade agreement. I've been to Vietnam, I've been many times to Europe, been to Brazil, been to El Salvador. So there's nothing prevents us from trading right now, and we need to do more of it. Frankly, the Germans and the Korean elected officials travel with their business groups on a lot more than Americans ever travel with American business groups from the state. So that's the first point. We can already trade, and we should. We should be more engaged with this world and the demand created by a rising global middle class. We should take some pride in that. But I do believe that this Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, the secrecy with which it was thrust upon us, I understand the urgency of wanting to be more engaged in Asia. I understand just what a large economy that China is, but I believe that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is bad for us as a country. I believe that after what we saw with NAFTA and the dislocation and the loss of jobs that created here in the United States, talk about devastation in Mexico and what that did to a lot of small communities and agrarian communities in Mexico. I think we need to focus on what makes us stronger as an economy here at home. It seems like we try to come up with a substitute for doing everything but that which our parents and grandparents taught us we must, which is to invest in our own country, to seed new industries, to invest in innovation here, mindful of the circulatory nature of a national economy. Not any more than, I mean, we can't make up for a lack of those investments with cheaper credit, can't make up for it by a race to the bottom, chasing the cheaper labor in other countries. So, but all of that would, I think, allow you to ask me fairly, what would be a good trade deal? I believe a good trade deal would be a trade deal that actually creates the level playing field and without diminishing our standards for labor and workers and our standards when it comes to protection of the environment. And I also believe that there is a real threat contained within the lines of this agreement that would create a precedent for multinational companies to sue their government in order to avoid those sorts of regulations that protect the environment and protect workers. And when you have a secret deal and the only people that get to see it are the great captains of corporate America who have more cash than they've had in a long time, but by God, they're not investing it productively, are they? We have never seen so much money put into stock buybacks as we have now, and now we're told trust us on the secret agreement that we're not allowed to read as a people before our representatives have to fast track it. It's not the way our country's supposed to work. I am opposed to anything we're not allowed to read before our representatives have to vote on it.
Maria, I think you got your answer. Clearly. But clearly, I mean, seriously though, our association has been very strongly in support of TPP, predominantly because we, and I think you'd agree with me, Governor, that 98% of exports in this country, in fact, are not being done by the large corporations. 98% of exports are being done by our very own small businesses.
Yep.
And more than 95% of the global marketplace exists outside of the United States. And to the extent that TPP, at least in its current state, does appear to put in place important environmental standards and labor regulations that I think level the playing field for our businesses to do business and to compete with small businesses in other parts of the world, I would venture to say that you would agree at least on those aspects of TPP.
I'm glad to read it now that, when we finally get a chance to read it. Well, like I say, I supported the South Korean free trade agreement.
As did we. With that, Governor, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, my friend.
You know what? We chatted backstage, and it turns out that we have at least a few things in common. First of all, we're both Catholic boys. One of us a good Catholic boy. I'm sure you're a better Catholic than I am, but Jesus loves me too, Governor. I'm not his favorite son, but I'm in the mix. I believe it. We both love rock and roll, and I think we're both big Springsteen fans. And it occurred to me as you were talking that in the words of Bruce Springsteen, you were born to run. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, some closing remarks from Governor O'Malley.
Javier, thank you, and to everyone here at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, thank you for your generosity, your hospitality through the years. This is not my first visit, but I do. I will always remember that the first public appearance I had as a presidential candidate was here at the Commerce. Look, I believe that we are on the threshold of a new era of American progress. And I believe that in order to move through that threshold, our country needs new leadership, and we need to remember that we're all in this together, that we need each other. And the most important beliefs we share as Americans are our beliefs in the dignity of every person and in the common good we share. We can make our economy work again for more of our people. And in fact, we must, because not only are our children depending on us, the people of this planet are depending upon us. There's a lot of work to be done. And we are up to the task if only we will return to our true selves and do the things that will make us a greater country for the next generation. Thanks a lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Wiley.